So it's tied 1-1 after the first two games of the World Series. The D-backs got their split when they went to Texas. And I have to say, the Diamondbacks team really impressed me coming out winning that game, too, after that heartbreaking way they lost game one.
You were saying that. I think the sum total of getting beaten that way in game one, you thought would have a carryover effect.
Well, they got beaten. The D-backs in game one essentially played their game. They got timely hits. They ran the bases well. They got to the end part of the game with their bullpen.
Their closer.
And they had their bullpen lined up, and they had Paul Sewald in the game, who up until this point in the postseries, I think was 6 for 6. He'd given up like 3 hits.
But then when I saw that 6 for 6, I thought, it's Paul Sewald. I mean, this is not Mariano Rivera here.
Right. And I think it's always kind of cheap when a guy is 6 for 6. It's really easy to say, well, he's due to mess it up eventually. Because, yes, by the law of averages and just the thinking of, yes, every pitcher is mortal. He will eventually have a bad game.
But don't you think every Diamondback fan was thinking, okay, don't let this be the one? Right? Don't let.
Well, you know what? Better this be the one than one later on in the series. Now he's had his one. Now he needs to bounce back and be good. And they went out and they didn't do it in the D-back way in game 2. They just beat the Texas Rangers at their own game and won 9-1.
So historically, having a closer come in and have a lead in the 9th inning and blow it, I think has happened in game 1 of the World Series has happened 3 times. It happened first when Dennis Eckersley threw the pitch to Kirk Gibson in the 1988 World Series. It happened to Armando Benitez
in the 2000 World Series against the Yankees.
It happened
and I know the other one, unfortunately. Also against the Mets with Jeurys Familia and Alex Gordon.
So, when you think about those guys, giving it up at the worst possible time, there's a Met history there, and Paul Sewald and those teams, interestingly enough, didn't win the World Series.
Right. And I think as a Met fan, Benitez blowing it wasn't too surprising at the time because he was always turbulent as a closer. Familia that season had been pretty invincible, so when he blew it in that game, that was a real gut punch. And Sewald had so far been invincible for the D-backs, but they responded really well in game 2, and they beat Jordan Montgomery, who looked tired.
Yes, I mentioned that a few times during the game.
After his game 7 pitching.
And it looked like he was laboring the whole time, and the Diamondbacks sort of played into that by I don't think they were trying to suck for Moreno, his home run, but they were just sort of knocking the ball around a lot, doing Diamondbacks baseball things.
Right. And they run the bases really well as a team. And that's something that I've noticed just in general, is that's a very fast team. And the fact that they can steal a lot of bases, I think they've stolen 13 plus bases in their last 4 games. That puts a lot of pressure on a defense when you're stealing 3-4 bases a game, when suddenly any walk or any single can turn into a guy on second base and is now in scoring position.
And I think that's something we'll talk about that a little bit more as it relates to some of the other things going on in Major League Baseball. But I guess I also have to come clean again, because every time Merrill Kelly goes out to pitch, I'm thinking he's going to.
Yeah, you owe him an apology letter after this postseason.
This guy, of course, now we're hearing all of the backstories on Merrill Kelly about his 4 years pitching in the KBO and how he just was trying so hard to get back to the major leagues. And so this is starting to have this sort of sepia tone to it.
Well, I mean, the guy's been unbelievable in the postseason so far. That was one of the most dominant World Series outings. People like that.
9 strikeouts for Merrill Kelly,
like an all-time World Series outing for him. So very big for the D-backs. And now it kind of comes down to the question that we had before the series: can Brandon Pfaadt shut down the Ranger lineup? Because the D-backs need to start out of one of these other guys in game 3 or 4 to have a chance in this series.
I guess if you looked at it from, this is a 5-game series now.
Yeah.
Okay, and so now if you've got Brandon Pfaadt, you've got Zach Gallen, and you probably got Merrill Kelly. I don't know if you're going to have anybody else start for the Diamondbacks. They just burned Jordan Montgomery. You still got some bullets in the gun, but the Rangers are a little bit in a
right.
In a
you've got Max Scherzer,
pitching.
And I don't think the Diamondbacks have any more idea who's going in game 4.
Right. I don't think that
either team knows who's going to be pitching game 4.
Exactly.
That might be a bullpen game. So game 3 is going to be very important, because if Max or if Brandon Pfaadt can give a big start,
Big swing game.
Right.
Obviously.
Like if one of those guys could go 5-6 innings,
Right.
or somehow one of them goes 7, that would be enormous for each of those teams to spare their bullpen.
By the way, and adding to my game one blowing it, so of course Sewell blew the save, but former Met Miguel Castro gave up the game-winning home run to Garcia. So
and he throws and Miguel Castro's best pitch is a slider. Unfortunately, Adolis Garcia hits sliders really well.
Joe Davis actually did it a couple of times, right? Because he kind of half called the Corey Seager home run, in game one, and then he kind of called, the one for Garcia
he's
as well.
very prescient with that. He's done that a lot throughout his career.
He's done a good job. I really like Joe Davis.
Yeah.
I think, and some people like to get on John Smoltz and all that. He gets a little bit too deep in the weeds sometimes, but I kind of like him. He's okay.
He's been fine this postseason.
Yeah. I think so too. I think he's got the right amount. So I guess we'll see if the bullpens can hold up, because I think that's going to play a greater role than it has so far. In that Merrill Kelly gave you 7 innings,
right?
You've kind of managed to get.
Montgomery went pretty deep into that game for the Rangers.
He didn't have very much.
He just was able to get guys out without having to throw a ton of pitches. So he at least 8 innings for the Rangers, even though they did end up losing that game.
So there were some other things that happened in baseball last week, and I don't know if you were surprised. I would say that I didn't know enough to not be surprised when Bob Melvin all of a sudden walked away from the Padres after A.J. Preller said he was coming back. Maybe that's the kiss of death when that happens, and all of a sudden finds himself managing the San Francisco Giants.
Right, very weird. That's a very. I'm certainly surprised because it happened all so quickly. It's just like all of a sudden Bob Melvin is the managing the Giants, just like that.
Well, the Giants, they extended Farhan Zaidi, so I assume that gave him the carte blanche to make this move. And if I were the Padres, nothing against Bob Melvin, by the way, but apparently it wasn't very good in San Diego this year with him and the team itself. You can't fire the whole team. So making a change at manager, even though I think A.J. Preller's had like 7 managers in 9 years or something.
Right.
Like that. There's something there. There's there, when a guy has that many managers.
Well, at a certain point, also considering it's largely been the same group of guys now there that have been there for 4 seasons at least.
This is the last year of this, right?
But are the inmates starting to run the asylum there a little bit? Because if there keeps being a problem with the manager, at a certain point you can't keep saying it's the manager.
So they don't have a manager, obviously, at this point, and nor do the Angels, who are talking about a guy who used to manage here in New York.
Right, who the Mets also do not have a manager.
Right. And so Craig Counsell was given permission, not just to talk to the Mets. I think he's talking to
whoever he wants.
Yeah, Cleveland. I think it was Cleveland.
Cleveland needs a manager. Who else needs a manager?
Obviously, we said the Padres need a manager. And I was surprised because I thought for sure at the end of the season, Ali Marmol of the Cardinals.
That doesn't mean that they might not still.
Pedro Grifol of the White Sox. I'm surprised that this
Boone's
guy is
still in New York.
Yeah, they put him in there. I for one don't think Boone is the guy you should get rid of, but he is named in those. Those 3 guys are right at the top of the list.
I think would be the 3 most likely guys to also get fired.
And so now that the Red Sox, who have a manager, they just hired Craig Breslow as the president of baseball operations.
I can't imagine he gets rid of Cora.
I don't think so because he's a smart guy. So Breslow.
Well, the Astros need a manager.
That is true. That just happened this week as well. Dusty retired. We should talk about that a little bit. Let me finish on Breslow. I was reading his background. So he went to Yale. I guess because we're Northeast based. I've seen this guy. I know he pitched for the Red Sox. A big left-handed pitcher, and he studied molecular physics and biochemistry. And I thought to myself, well, it's a good thing it's not rocket science, because that would be a bad thing if a baseball player actually studied rocket science and then all of a sudden became a general manager, because he would never live that down going, oh, that's not rocket science.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but it's a lot more imprecise than rocket science. That's the hardest part. You're kind of just, at the end of the day, you're just picking the guys and hoping they work out.
And Craig Counsell obviously looking around, at jobs, and I'm surprised that he is actually considering leaving Milwaukee, because to me he's so Mr. Brewer, and I know the Mets, and somebody wrote that he's like best friends with David Stearns. I don't know if that's the new Pobo of the Mets.
Right.
I just don't know if, would you really want to leave Milwaukee? You got kids there. You've been there your whole career. You got a family. Only if Steve Cohen, I guess, opens up the checkbook in a way that nobody else. He would have to be the highest paid manager in baseball, I think, for him to want to move in my estimation.
Or he's been a manager in Milwaukee that's been frustrated by
not having enough money to spend on the team.
Right. And
he's only going to have that now.
Right, exactly. He's like, come to New York, come win a title in New York, be a god, and you'll have all the money in the world to get what we want.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm hoping for that. I like the guy. I think I have no reason to think he wouldn't do a good job in New York. New York is a different place to manage than Milwaukee. Let's just leave it at that.
True.
So I just don't know about, everybody's so sure he's going to leave, and how much is it going to really cost Milwaukee more to keep Counsell? Would you really let him go over $1 million a year or something like that?
Well, if he wants to go, what are they going to really be able to?
Well, I think he might want to be paid commensurately with how, the best managers in baseball,
right?
And so that's where they are in that margin right now.
True, but if he wants to leave and go manage in New York, there's very little Milwaukee can do to get him to stop.
Of course, no, and that's why he's looking around, not just at the Mets.
Right, he's trying to get paid too.
And so, do you think the guys that are people that are hiring teams, hiring managers, and stuff like that are looking at the playoffs and thinking, okay, the game is changing, and do we need to have a manager who can be in step with the changes that have come as a result of the new rules, like stealing more bases and
I certainly think that what you're seeing is that the managers that have their managers are going younger. We're seeing the older managers getting phased out because I think that managing the players is becoming more and more important, and these older managers
agreed. It's harder to relate.
Aren't relating as well. So
that might be like a guy like Buck Showalter can last a couple of years, but after a while it gets tired. The generation, difference.
And especially as a Met team got considerably younger over the course of the year. They went from being a veteran team when he was first hired to being a much younger team. Suddenly, Buck is not the right guy to manage a real young team like that.
Right, and playing young players was something that Buck seemed to adapt to as he came to the Mets.
Right, but he was still not.
That wasn't his reputation.
And that was something Dusty Baker and Houston struggled with.
Yep.
And so we talked about that last week, and because him going up, behind Aaron.
And I don't know. I'm watching obviously the World Series and the playoffs in general, and with the amount of running they are doing at this point, how much of that is called or just like you got a green light. If you think you can make it, you go. Is that managing? That's just giving.
Well, Torey Lovullo said specifically after the first few games in the NLCS, he started calling a steal more because that's what their team identity was. So that's either
they didn't have a green light to go.
Right, and they either turned it on or they just started calling steal. My guess is that it's less that they're calling a steal on a specific pitch, and more certain guys are being able to they give them the signs, and somewhere in those signs is the green light, and then that guy knows, okay, from this pitch on I have the green light to look.
And it's not like the catchers in the World Series in particular, Moreno and Jonah Heim, don't have excellent arms and can really throw. I guess it's just such an advantage. It's really hard to stop these guys.
I think I was saying previously that Heim, or at another point, that Heim is a very good defensive catcher, but he's actually not got the fastest pop time. He's actually got a bottom half pop time in the MLB. So it's important for the Texas pitchers to be fast to home, because if they're not, they're going to get run on, and we saw that last night where Padromo totally stole a base on Montgomery. The fact that they're able to steal bases on the left-handed pitches for the Rangers, and now you're going to Arizona where it's going to be loud. You might be struggling with pitch comm. That could be a real problem for the Rangers if they're not able to keep the Diamondbacks off the base paths.
And we know from experience, even watching a guy like Max Scherzer, he's not particularly fast to home plate.
No.
He can slide step. He can do all the things a pitcher needs to do.
But he's not the best about keeping runners.
So that in and of itself, is challenging, and I think it's going to make, teams look at that aspect of the pitcher's performance is going to become more important as time goes on in terms of doing it. So I put a little something in here when I just saw the umpires, and I know we don't want to talk too much about umpires, but they named all 6 umpires before Game 1 of the World Series. Okay, and I'm looking at this guy, number 1, I don't really recognize any of them at all. I think I recognize one name, I can't remember what it is. And I thought, well, that's a good thing, right? I don't really want to recognize the umpires.
Right.
I hope that I don't notice them, actually.
Right, and so far, I haven't noticed anything specifically about the umpires.
They're all equally about as bad at missing calls too often for my taste.
Right.
On balls and strikes. on
balls and strikes,
and
yeah.
that's just looking. As
Yeah,
a
I
fan,
think Quinn Wolcott was the umpire last
yep,
night. He
yep.
had a
He's got
pretty
good rating.
It was like, I think it was one of the top 5 umpires in the league this year. But his strike zone seemed big last night. There were a lot of balls that were called outside the box on TV. Now, I think we've talked about it before that the boxes on TV are not 100% representative of what the actual strike zone
Which
is.
is really bad for a fan because it seems so clear to the fan when you're looking. It's either in on the corner, on the edge of the box, or out of the box.
So I think getting a better box for TV is probably I wonder if that's almost the holdup for automatic balls and strikes, is trying to get the product to look right for TV so that the fans aren't constantly confused about why sometimes balls below or outside the zone are strikes and when they're not strikes.
And MLB has no immediate plan to put in ABS
No.
At this point, and Manfred has gone on record as saying that.
But it's coming.
I do think there's still.
I think they're doing it in the
experimenting
KBO next year.
with it. I think I did see that also.
Right, that was a big announcement that they were moving to that next year. And so I'm sure Major League Baseball will be paying very close attention to how that goes.
It's just it's better. Right, it's more reliable. I don't want to have to say, oh well, he got away with a call that was like we all agree on what it's going to be, and you live by that. We're all playing by the same rules at that point. And again, fortunately, nothing has happened in the World Series. Like, oh, he got jobbed on a call, and that probably is not an outcome here.
But I mean, we've even seen it within these games that like there was, I think one part of game 1 where a guy didn't get a call on one pitch, and he definitely gave him a makeup call later in the at bat, and that's a problem where like, oh, he didn't call a borderline pitch one way, so then he called a borderline pitch the other way later on. And it's just like, is that... Yes, theoretically, they've evened it out, but it's not even.
and one pitch that was off the plate that got hit for a home run by Mitch Garver, and I thought it was Jonah. It was Mitch Garver. It was Mitch Garver.
Yesterday.
It was on the inside half of the plate, and so you know how much I hate these in-game interviews, but Ken Rosenthal, there he is in the dugout talking to him, and he said, you know, what were you looking for? And you actually got an honest response from Mitch Garver that I thought, wow, okay, so that's one.
Yeah,
you know, 1 out of
he was like,
100.
I was just looking for a pitch to hit.
Yeah, that was not where I expected to be. I didn't expect to hit it out. I was just trying to hit it hard, and,
right.
and you know, I'm feeling good about that. These guys are good, you know. So I appreciated him saying, no, I wasn't trying to do that to that pitch, and it just kind of
right. And I think that's probably more indicative of how most guys do hit home runs. Is that they're not really intentionally trying to hit a home run. They're just trying to make,
unless your name is Adolis Garcia,
right? You're just trying to make good, solid contact, and if you do get a hold of one, these guys are so big and strong that they hit it out of the park.
And also when guys throw, you know, in the upper 90s and all that, you know, the trampoline effect.
When the ball, you get it on the good part of the bat, the ball compresses and you can just drive it a whole long way.
I was going to mention something that I noticed this week, and you know how I'm a student of history. So we're 100 years, it's 2023, from the Yankees' first World Series victory in 1923. That was, in fact, the first year of Yankee Stadium. Okay, so, and as I've said before, and this kind of Babe Ruth played for the Yankees in 1921 and 22, and he played in the Polo Grounds, which the Yankees basically formulated Yankee Stadium to look like the Polo Grounds because Ruth was hitting lots of home runs at the Polo Grounds.
So let's make sure it kind of works for him.
Thing, which is pretty cool. But then, and I thought, again, like, okay, so 27 World Series, we know they've got that. In 100 years, and you throw out the strike year, so it's even a little better than that. That's 27% of all the World Series played in the last 100 years run by the Yankees. It's weird to say that, you know,
right?
Like that's just stunning.
Now, granted, they did it at a time when there was a lot less teams in the league.
Yeah, that's true. Expansion, you know, in 1961 definitely made it harder, and we certainly won't see anything like that, any kind of a run. But the Yankees had a run in the mid 90s,
right?
You know that 4 and 5 years that like just.
And thank God, and Yankee fans will say thank God for 2009.
Yeah. Oh, Russ, they would be looking back pretty far.
They would be. They would not.
As far as the Mets.
Not as far as the Mets. Not as far as the Mets.
So I think you know,
and it's funny because my mind was going to. We watched 8 Man Out the other night, and the line that you pointed out that was really interesting is that they're getting talked to by the lawyers, and the lawyers are all introducing themselves as the Tris speakers and stuff. And one of the guys goes, "Who's the Babe Ruth of lawyers?" And it's like Babe Ruth wouldn't have been a household name.
Right, this was 1920, and Babe Ruth was playing for the Red Sox, and he wasn't the home run hitter. A little bit. He was a home run hitter,
but he was mostly a pitcher at that point.
He had been mostly, but he had already started at that point.
But
so.
he wouldn't be referenced.
He wasn't quite the venerated player yet in
certainly not to be referred to in the same category as Tris Speaker.
And I thought it was interesting in that 23 World Series that Casey Stengel, the first manager of the Mets, hit 2 home runs for the New York Giants against the Yankees. So he manages the Yankees, he manages the Mets, and then he plays for the Giants.
So Casey Stengel is part of New York baseball history.
Yeah. I don't think he had any Dodger, blood in there or anything like that.
Well, it's kind of tough to have Dodger blood in there because it means to go out to Los Angeles.
No, it's Brooklyn.
Well, Brooklyn. Oh, true.
Yeah.
Brooklyn.
So, that would have been something. So
well, I guess the Giants and the New York Giants and the Brooklyn Dodgers are
right.
So he has some in there because he played for the Giants.
Right, but just the only team he missed was the Dodgers. I'm saying he got the Mets too.
Right.
So
I see what you're saying.
That's a lot of teams. And I was reading before this, and back to the World Series a second. So are you worried that people said, well, this is low winning percentage for these two teams? It's probably one of the worst World Series because you've got a number 6 and a number 5 seed, if you will, playing for the championship.
I think the only people who are saying that are the same people that are upset that there are too many teams in the World Series in the playoffs.
Yeah,
because I think as long as the quality of the games are good, I don't really care what teams are in the World Series.
And so that's what makes you're right. The first game was great because it seemed like it was going to be a boring game, 5-3 lead.
And then it was exciting.
All of a sudden, it was incredible.
And then the D-backs came.
And we had the first extra inning game, I think, of the playoffs this year.
The first extra inning game since game 1 of the World Series last year.
And so what's interesting about that, I don't remember game 1 of the World Series because what I noticed and I didn't follow was there was no ghost runner, as they like to call it, on second base.
Right.
I had read so much about them saying he hadn't made up the mind, Manfred and the guys haven't made up their mind whether they're going to play by different rules.
I think this is the right way to do it.
I agree.
Right. You ghost runners during the regular season because nobody wants to watch a 15-inning game during the regular season. No ghost runners in the playoffs because extra inning playoff baseball is pretty unusual. And having a longer extra inning game is fine because it's the playoffs. It's the exact way hockey does it.
Yeah. And having a 15-inning World Series game is just fine by me.
Right. Nobody would want to watch nobody wants to watch a triple overtime game in the regular season. A shootout is fine, but nobody would want to watch a shootout in the playoffs. Nobody wants to watch a ghost runner in the playoffs.
In 1987, the Twins won the World Series against the Cardinals, and they were not 7-game World Series, great teams. But in '91, the Braves were sort of like a team that won 94 games and kind of slipped their way in the World Series. As did the Twins, and they played an epic 7-game series, highlighted by Jack Morris's 1-0 win over John Smoltz in Game 7.
So as long as we have some good games here where we go to the desert in Arizona, we'll be fine. We just don't want that Cardinals Rangers World Series from a couple years back, about a decade ago.
Yeah, it's a decade.
That was a really boring World Series.
I don't remember much about that.
Right,
World Series.
The Cardinals just kind of spanked them. I remember the Cardinals Tigers World Series was particularly bad too because the Tigers just played really poorly.
But they had one game in there that was because wasn't there a 13-12 game in the Cardinal Ranger World Series or something crazy like that?
Right. Yeah.
So you get one game, but they need now. You've had one really close game, obviously one not close game.
Now you need to have a good game 3.
You need to have nice games the next few games to really kind of make this a special World Series. So I think for us, and we talked about we normally drop on Thursdays, and you're going to have games obviously on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. So I think we're going to hold off recording a World Series podcast, and maybe we'll drop it towards the end of the week, maybe even after the World Series is over.
Right. We'll probably wait until the World Series is over, unless we're getting a Game 7 epic all-time World Series.
Or it rains for 6 days the way that it did in 19.
Not going to be a problem. They're in a dome.
That's right. You're right.
So I think we'll probably be dropping towards Friday, Saturday next week, just so that we can recount all of the World Series games. Just because that way we could talk about it in totality, and we don't have to record with 2 games left. But if we're going to go to a Game 7, we might talk about in a really exciting Game 7.
Yeah. I think we're getting to the point where doing This Week in Baseball isn't going to be about baseball games. So we're gonna we said we're going to introduce some deep dives.
We're going to be doing some deep dives. We're going to be talking about about, doing some team profiles, some more, esoteric baseball topics that are a little bit more evergreen.
Yeah. This week, there was a story on the antitrust exemption for baseball being fought, and this happens periodically. I think they've had an antitrust exemption for over 100 years, since 1922. So we're talking with Kellyanne Throop about maybe having her come on and help us sort of sift through this. But you need to watch this, because the Supreme Court could end up with this antitrust case for baseball.
Right, and these are the kinds of things that crop up, and then they become a big deal for the business of baseball when they do come in. But obviously, thank you for listening. If anybody has any ideas for episodes or just wants to reach out and talk, we always love people reaching out to us. You can reach out to us on Twitter.
We'll be here for you during the off season, so give us stuff to talk about.
Yeah,
because
email. I guess it's X now, but email. Yeah, just reach out to us. We love hearing from people, and hoping to a really exciting rest of the World Series.
Yes, let's go. I don't know. I just want to see a good World Series.
25 minutes, 24:51.
We can vamp, can't we?
You can. Yeah, sorry, it did the same thing. It was like all of a sudden the camera turned on.
Because here's the thing.
What?
This is a hack job.
Right, but it wasn't doing that, and all of a sudden, like the
that is
last
something we can.
3 times, it's like done it.
That is something we can look at.
I'm glad I mentioned the thing about the antitrust thing. I almost forgot.
But we did a good job of finding stuff to talk about.
Yeah. There was more than we thought.
Yeah,
Even Mom was somewhat interested.
someone.
The good thing about This Week in Baseball is it's much easier for us to bounce around it during it.
Yeah. We don't have to. There's no North Star.
Right.